You have to say no at some point. Or you have to go to an administrator, find at least one sympathetic one. It might not be the principal, but hopefully there's at least one person in the building where you can say, I am doing this and it's dominating my life. Is there anything that you recommend that I either can stop doing, or do you think that there's a way that I might be able to help manage the workload a little bit better?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Matt Conaway. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Yep, glad to. Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure thing. Again, my name is Matt Conaway. I'm currently an associate professor of bands at Purdue University, and I'm also a composer and arranger with both the CL Barnhouse Company and Hal Leonard Publications.
That's right. So, Matt, can you talk about just very briefly what you do at Purdue?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm an associate director of the Purdue All-American Marching Band. I direct the men's basketball pep band, which is named Boiler Brass. I also direct two spring semester concert bands here, number two, and then one of our general pool of bands on the other end of that. I also do a lot of administrative work, travel planning, and logistics within the department.
Sure. That must be a huge amount of logistics to be part of a Big Ten marching band.
It's like moving a city every time we go anywhere. But it's a lot of fun, too. Band directors have to be organized, and this is one of those ways that we really can shine here, is just by making sure we can move 400 people at a time without getting anyone lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of great stories, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Matt, can you tell everyone about your musical background, how you got into music, maybe your early instrumental studies or as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. It started out, honestly, when I was really little, maybe 3 years old, when my grandma was playing piano. She was a honky tonk piano player. She couldn't read a note of music. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that she was a really good player, and she would sit down and improvise or play some of the songs from her childhood. And I remember just sitting on the piano bench next to her, watching her play and listening to her play. I fell asleep on the piano bench any number of times while she was doing that. And when I was 4 years old, my parents started me on very early piano lessons. So I learned a little bit, of course, on how to read music starting from that point. But I also really remember just coming up with my own things or trying to figure out how songs sounded on the piano. So early transcription. And grandma was the one that really encouraged that. When I was 10 years old, fifth grade band started. And I went through the whole process of instrument testing, and every instrument I wanted to play, I was given some reason why that wouldn't work. I'm not particularly old, but at that point, I really wanted to play flute, and I was told that boys don't play the flute. You need to try something else. So, okay, I guess I didn't know any better. And they wouldn't let me do any of the reeded instruments because of all the orthodontia that I had going. They wouldn't let me try trumpet for the same reasons. I was going to have braces. We didn't start horns or baritones or tubas. So it came down to trombone and percussion. So I thought, okay, this isn't bad. I've played piano. Percussion sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. And I got home and mom said, you're not bringing a drum into my house. So I played the trombone. And that's where the band experience started. And trombone's still my major instrument.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting story about your grandmother. How did she play honky tonk piano?
She actually learned it from her mother. My grandmother on that side was blind from the age of 2, so reading music was never going to happen. They were in Wetzel County, West Virginia, and she played in bars and other things in that immediate area, and grandma just picked it up, my grandma picked it up from her mother. on all of this. And that's a story I didn't know until a little bit later on. By the time I met my great-grandmother, she wasn't playing anymore, but it was a completely passed on sound and tradition, and Grandma kept that alive.
Matt, how about high school or junior high music teachers? Do you have anyone that sticks out that you remember as being influential? And do you carry any lessons from that person?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to start with middle school, the band director I had there, a fine teacher, and he made band a lot of fun, as well as, he instilled the message that it's more fun to be good than it is to be bad. So we might as well have fun being good. But the other real memory I take from that was he was the one that ultimately got me started in actually writing out the music that I was coming up with. I had been improvising at the keyboard and been coming up with my own tunes. And I asked him, I think it was my 8th grade year, are there people out there who will write this stuff down, write down the music that you come up with? And he said, well, yeah, those people are out there, but they're really expensive. You may as well just start to come up with it yourself. And I asked him where to start, and he said, well, look at the notes you're playing and write them down, and then play back what you see. If it's not right, try again. And that message really was the first real lesson I had in transcription, which allowed me to transcribe what was going on in my own head down onto paper at that point. This was pre-finale for me. In fact, our family didn't even own a computer by that point. That came a little bit later on that year. So he got that started. And then in high school, I had him for 1 year, and then we switched directors my sophomore year. And he was very encouraging for both the writing and the playing. He was doing things to get me involved in going to other music events, to be more involved in solo and ensemble festival, and really pushed me toward eventually going into music. So that's really kind of where the foundation was. There was also a community band director that I worked with in our area. I grew up in the Downriver area of Michigan, just south of Detroit. And he had just retired from his high school position, and he embraced me as a member of this community band as one of the very few high school students involved with it. And he gave me performance opportunities and even allowed me to have my first conducting experience in public. I rehearsed the band and got them ready. It was my senior year of high school for a major performance that it really gave me a great opportunity to see about the teaching aspect and the conducting aspect, if that was something I really wanted to get into, and it verified that I did.
Yeah. So did you have any music played by any of these teachers?
My high school director he allowed the band to read a couple of my pieces here and there, but nothing was really performed at that point outside of a chamber group that I was playing in. Our trombone group played a piece of mine each year at solo and ensemble, my junior and senior year. But I wasn't really writing heavy duty band music at that point, or anything that was playable. Even the stuff that we read down, I think every composer has this experience. The first time they hear their music played by human beings, it's terrifying and really deflating. And it's not the band's fault. It almost never is the band's fault at that point.
So Matt, I'm interested in these opportunities that you had as a high school student, because to me, as I talk to people who are become composers or conductors and who have big careers in our field, it seems that they had a teacher early on who nurtured this and fostered this. And I was wondering if you had thoughts for teachers who could nurture and foster this in their own students.
I think the most important thing is, when you are encouraging, especially to become a composer, you have to encourage them to get their music played very quickly, and you have to help facilitate that whenever you really can. I'm not saying that you want to throw everything that any student composer does in front of your band immediately, but you have to at least give them some kind of opportunity or outlet. Especially if it's a composer who's really shy about their music, you want them to understand that it's not really done until you hear that it's actually going to work. And without the opportunity, it just goes nowhere, whether you do it through composition units in the classroom and just planning a curriculum that allows for something more than just performing the concerts. I think that's probably the most encouraging thing that can happen. And it doesn't have to always be something formal in the classroom. It could be an offhand comment to someone saying, hey, have you heard this piece by this composer? YouTube has not been the greatest thing in the world for getting writers paid for their music, but it certainly has been one of the best things for getting music out and available to hear. So just say, hey, have you listened to this? You really should listen to this. This is why I love this piece. And that can be just that extra bit of work to encourage someone's musical development. That's huge.
So, Matt, when did you make the decision that you were going to be a professional musician, or that you were going to follow a path towards being a professional musician?
I think what really did it for me was the summer after my junior year of high school. I attended Interlochen Arts Camp, and I attended as a composition major. So my entire day was surrounded with creating as much music as I possibly could. I took courses and other things. I took a music theory class. I took conducting. I was taking trombone lessons as well as composition lessons, and I even took an acting class while I was there. But I was immersed in the environment for 8 weeks, and I knew immediately that it was to this day, that's the happiest summer of my life. And it gave me the opportunity to say, I really can just sink my entire life into this, and it's something that is fulfilling and exciting. So that was the big one as far as becoming a career musician. And the composition side, what I realized that summer is that I enjoy doing it very much, but it wasn't ever going to be the sole thing that I do in life. I didn't have that kind of passion for it. As far as becoming a conductor and a teacher, that I think came from a combination of my school band directors as well as the community band director that I mentioned previously. I saw that he had a very long and fulfilling career. I also saw several of his former students participating in this community band, and that told me that he's managed to make not just a classroom connection, but a lifetime connection with these players. And there was something just really exciting and fulfilling about that. Now, as far as becoming a college band director, that just happened. I was teaching high school for 10 years and middle school for 10 years, and the position at Purdue came open. I was teaching in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I figured, okay, I'll apply. I would kick myself for not giving it a chance. And the more I looked at it, the more interesting this opportunity sounded. And when I got the position, my office moved 6 blocks, and here I am. So I've been in Greater Lafayette now for 18 years.
The most successful conductors I know at the college level were outstanding teachers at lower levels also.
Absolutely right. And that's, where we are at Purdue that's especially important, because without us offering music degrees, what we're really doing is offering the continued experience from what hopefully these students had at their high school programs. And in some cases, our upper groups are playing at an incredibly high level at music school caliber, and our lower ensembles, the level of music they're playing requires the pedagogical experience. We're still teaching, in some cases, embouchure formation. We're still teaching fingerings. We're still working on some of those things. But ultimately, it's with the goal of keeping these students as lifelong musicians, not just performers, but advocates. So all of us on the faculty here in Purdue Bands and Orchestras have some high school teaching experience, in many cases at a really significant level before they got here. And
you were a high school teacher for 17 years? Is that correct?
For 10 years.
10 years,
and
sorry.
I've been at Purdue now for 7.
Oh, okay, I see. Got that.
Yeah, but the program I had was a 5th through 12th grade program. So I had the full range of it all the way through. And I did this without benefit of assistant. So I saw every student at least every 2 days. Most of them I saw every day. And I graduated 3 classes by the time I was done that had me for all 8 years of their band experience.
We're going to talk about that job a little bit more, but I want to stay chronological if I can. So you did your undergraduate at Indiana University?
Yes, I did.
I heard about that place. Good school?
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was an excellent environment. It was one of those, I didn't even really know much about the program until I was at Interlochen, and I asked all of my teachers, where should I look for a composition degree or for a music education degree? And they all gave me a whole range of schools, all of which were excellent. But the only school that all of them said was Indiana. So
you were a music ed major at Indiana. At IU.
Yes.
And then, so now you mentioned that this job was 5 through 12. Did you taught the beginners all the way through the advanced? How many bands did you have?
Oh gosh. 5th and 6th grade were both 0-hour classes, and they met on alternating days. So I had Monday, Wednesday, 5th graders, Tuesday, Thursday, 6th graders. 7th grade was its own class, 8th grade, high school second band, high school top band, and a high school percussion class. That was the daily load. And then the extracurriculars outside of it, we had an extracurricular non-competitive marching band. The symphony orchestra, the full orchestra, was actually an extracurricular. We had a full string orchestra program, but the full orchestra did not meet during the day. Then basketball pep band, jazz band, orchestra pit.
So now, did you start beginners? What grades did you start beginners? Both 6th and 7th?
We started 5th grade.
5th grade. Did you have 6th grade beginners?
Occasionally I had sixth grade beginners, yes. And then our setup, we had a K through 3 elementary, a 4 through 6 elementary, and then a 7 to 12 junior senior high. So that was really the line there. As long as I had them going by sixth grade, and then by the time they got into seventh, that was a lot easier to work with because the seventh grade band became a daily course.
And based on what you're telling me, that was all heterogeneous classes as beginners.
Yes, and usually in the first semester with fifth grade, I had a woodwind day and a brass day. And then so I would do like Mondays would be woodwinds and percussionists on mallets. Wednesday would be brass and percussionists on drums. And then Friday, woodwind and brass. And that's the day we spent the most of our time on, let's say, breathing exercises, just long tones, listening when the percussionists weren't in the room at that point. And then the second semester, it became heterogeneous classes Monday and Wednesday. And then high school jazz band met on Friday mornings.
That's an interesting way to do it, to have the percussionists come during the sectional times. Did that help with them?
It was just a matter of divvying it up. And it also dedicated the fact that we were going to spend half of our time on mallets at minimum. And that was, I think, pretty helpful.
Can you tell me about that move? I mean, I know you mentioned that you saw the opportunity at Purdue, but how did that happen? Because I find that really interesting. Did you see the advertisement or did someone approach you?
Actually, it was one of my colleagues in the area told me that this position was open, and that was a surprise because no one was leaving the Purdue band program at that point. So I sent a note to Jay Gephardt, the director of bands here, and he said that it was actually a newly created position that they had just been granted because of growth in their program. And it was very late in the process. This was early May that I heard about this position, and normally you fill a collegiate position by March. So I was surprised they were doing an actual they were trying to fill the position for a tenure track position that late. So I looked at the application process and I asked Jay, like, is this something that I would even have a shot at? And he said, you lose absolutely nothing by trying. We'd be interested in seeing what you have to offer. So that's kind of where that came into play. And then I made it through the first couple of rounds, and then I got the live interview. And at this point I'm going, is this something that I really would be interested in doing? Because if I take this, I'm leaving my high school position 3 weeks before band camp. How is this something I even can do? And when I went through the interview process, I got to see what the job was going to be. It was really exciting. And then a week later, when the offer came across, I knew I was ready to make the move. But I had also been working to get everything ready for the high school on the way out. The show was designed. Everything was ready to go. I was operating as if I was going to be there because in my mind, I had a 3 out of 4 chance that I would be there, based on the interview round. And I think what made it easier to say yes to the Purdue offer was the fact that the mission of the program here was so similar to what my mission was as an educator anyway, which is, just creating opportunities for as many students as possible to do it at the highest artistic level, but with the understanding that this wouldn't necessarily be a career for very many people. And it felt like a good time to make that switch.
Do you ever work with any of the high schools in the area, Matt?
Absolutely. My schedule in the spring is really flexible. My ensembles meet back to back on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And especially when we start getting into festival season or contest or assessment, whatever you call it in your area, I find that I'm going out and clinicking quite a bit. And, it's really fun for me to get back into the classroom like that and just do the one shot rehearsal. Here's what I'm hearing as an outside person. Here's what I would do to fix this. Maybe they're hearing the same stuff in a different way. Maybe they're hearing something they haven't heard before. And just to see all of these student groups that are working really hard to put together a good performance, it's really exciting to get back into the classroom like that.
I have a very good friend who I went to undergraduate with who teaches at Sheridan High School. Just
down the road, yeah. I'm not sure I know who the current band director is. I know that my high school had a really close relationship with the Sheridan bands for a number of years. We would do side-by-side performances in football season. We'd have cookouts for each other right before we would play. That was usually the last football game of the year.
Can you talk about the high school band levels in Indiana? It has a reputation for strength, though, in their high school bands.
Yeah, absolutely. Having BOA, Music for All, headquartered in Indianapolis doesn't hurt when you know that opportunity is going to be there. But it just seems that there was an interest that has gone on for a long time to get really solid bands at each school. There have been a chain of very good band directors, especially in the ring right around Indianapolis, but certainly in other pockets around the state. You go to northern Indiana, where, in South Bend, there's a lot of strong programs, and up in the region up by Chicago. There's a lot of really fine directors. You also have a case where for many years you had a whole series of really excellent music schools. So music ed folks were graduating having had a tremendously strong collegiate experience. Then they've generally stayed for a very long time. I think Indiana has a lot of very fine band tradition among those very large schools in particular. There's been a history of innovation in the marching area. We certainly have seen it. And I think, I know that we'll probably end up talking on the competition side a little bit later, but the contest movement was very strong in Indiana back all the way to the 20s and 30s. You had national champion concert bands like up at Hobart High School with William Ravelli as the director, and several other programs of that caliber that helped instill this idea that it's okay for your music program to get a heavy priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. So, Matt, let's talk about your other work as a composer. You are published by both Barnhouse and you mentioned Hal Leonard.
That is correct. I've done my original work with Barnhouse now for 11 years. And about maybe 5 years ago, I started doing some arrangements of non-public domain works for the Hal Leonard Company.
So how did you get started as a composer? I know you mentioned that you did some composing in high school, but when did you first sort of get that first published piece? What was that experience and how did that sort of come about?
Sure. The first publication I did, it was a piece that I had written for one of my elementary groups. And it was right around that time that I saw on a forum that I was following that there was a publisher that was starting up that wanted to do all PDF-based sales. And I sent the note along. It was called John Ross Music. And I sent in a series of pieces. And one of the editors on that was a guy by the name of Larry Norrid, who had many pieces published back in the 70s and 80s. I think Jensen Publications was his last big company that he was with. And he was working on building this kind of from the ground up with a colleague in Arkansas. And I had some pieces that were published through them. They never were tremendously commercially successful, but it was at least a start to go through that editorial process. My music did get out there a little bit. I was starting to get word that it was being performed. And it was exciting, and I decided to send some pieces on to a couple of other publishers. So I sent a portfolio of a few of my pieces. I made a rookie mistake where I sent the same pieces to several publishers at once just to get review.
Yeah, but don't do that, everybody.
Yeah, no kidding. But in my case, it worked out because I got stamped or form rejection letters from nearly all of them. So that worked out. But the response that I really appreciated getting came from Andy Glover at the C.L. Barnhouse Company, where he said for 3 of the 4 pieces, it's not that this is a bad piece, but here's why we're not interested in publishing this. It was a real lesson in some of the realities of the publishing field, where at the end of the day, it's a business. There's not, that's not a charity to composers. They have to make sure that these pieces are commercially successful. But the 4th piece, he said that he was interested in publishing it if I would be interested in going along with that. And he had me assigned to an editor a couple months later. That editor was a man by the name of Robert W. Smith. That wasn't terrifying at all. And Robert guided me through the editorial process from the perspective of a major publisher, which was a very different experience and very blunt experience. But I learned more in just editing that piece than I had in years in the composition side. And so I published 1 piece with them, and it was kind of R&D. Is this going to work? If this works, there'll probably be more. If this piece doesn't sell well, we'll have to evaluate that. That was a piece called Snakebite, and to this day, it remains one of my top selling and top performed pieces at the grade 2 level. So that was where it started. And the next year, the folks at Barnhouse asked me if I had anything else that they might be interested in, and I did. I think 5 pieces that next year. And it just took off from there. And I've maintained that relationship for quite a while. So that was kind of how it happened. It came from randomly sending stuff out in a way that I, again, was told later was not the right way to go about this. But, Barnhouse was the company that took a chance on me.
I just opened up the PDF for Snakebite on the Barnhouse site. Just wanted to, I don't know this piece.
Yeah, this was, I wrote it initially for my sixth grade band, and I toughened a couple details of it up when it went in for publication, just making things a little more consistent within the grade level, because I wrote it for my group of players where I knew that there were some strengths that we had and some sections that definitely were weaker than the others. So I had to make it a little bit more uniformly grade 2 rather than, a grade 1 trombone part, but a grade 2.5 clarinet part and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's quite a step to go to that big publisher. And, it is a little bit intimidating. You mentioned that it wasn't scary at all to talk to Robert, kind of sarcastically.
But it's intimidating just because of the knowledge that he brings to the table. It's not the manner in which he goes about the process. He was incredibly kind. But you're just looking at somebody who has icon status in the profession. And to have someone like that going through your first major publication was really daunting. It led to some other fun though in the classroom. There was one point where he called me on an editorial question and I'd forgot to turn my phone off. So I'm in an 8th grade rehearsal, and as luck would have it, we're rehearsing in Canto by Robert W. Smith. The phone rings, and of course my band's giving me all sorts of grief that my phone is ringing. I looked at who it was and I held the phone up to my oboe player and I said, "Do you think I should answer this?" He saw who it was and he's shaking his head. No. So I answered, and I told Robert very quickly I was in the middle of a rehearsal and would he like to hear any of Encanto since we were rehearsing it? And we played like 16 bars of it for him, and he said it sounded good and he wanted the trumpets to do better dynamics, and we'll talk in half an hour. So to be able just to bring that experience into the classroom made all the stress about knowing that someone like him was looking at my music go a little bit easier.
So from there, you mentioned you'd had 5 pieces published the next year, and then how did you get approached by Hal Leonard? How did that come about?
Hal Leonard was simply a case of right place, right time. Paul Lavender, who is one of the senior VPs at Hal Leonard, sent 2 of his kids through the Purdue University band program. They were both in the marching band.
Wow.
And I actually knew Eric, his oldest son, for many years, back from when I was first in this area. I was a grad assistant with the Purdue band program for 1 year before I got my high school job. And I met Eric. I actually went to his wedding, and I tailgated and had season football tickets with him for several years. Paul has remained on our advisory board for Purdue Bands and Orchestras. So he would come back for occasional football games. And I think it was my second year at Purdue. I had a lot of tunes in the stands book. I had done some arrangements for Purdue before I was employed here. And he kept asking Jay, who wrote that? And almost in every case, the answer was either me or my colleague Ishba Cox, who he and I shared an office for several years. And we were both doing most of the wind arranging for the marching band. And I don't remember if Paul contacted us directly or if he told Mike Sweeney to contact us, but they came to us both and asked us to do a couple charts for the Hal Leonard marching band catalog. So we both got our start the same year. And at one point, probably half or more of the Hal Leonard marching band catalog was coming out of Elliott Room 56 here at Purdue.
So what's your favorite thing you've done for Hal Leonard?
Oh, for Hal Leonard, I think the John Williams stuff from Force Awakens is probably, we did, my percussion writer Jack Holt and I did 3 charts on Force Awakens. And I think part of the fun of that was just knowing that we were getting into music by, again, an icon in the film scoring world. And, Mike Sweeney sent us copies of the scores that were being prepared for publication, copies of the recordings that didn't even have track names on it. It was just track 1, track 2, track 3. And the last thing he told us is, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Williams will have to review your music before we go to print." So there's another one of those. Okay, I'm bust out the Xanax. Here we go. And see what we can do to get ready for this. Again, a great experience. I didn't have any direct interaction with John Williams, but through Paul and through Mike, we got everything ready to go. But just working on music of that caliber was really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any advice for someone who's getting into arranging as maybe a high school director or someone who's listening? Do you have any thoughts about what maybe some tips for them?
It goes back to the same notes I have for composers, actually, which is whatever you write, get it played. Just even if it's just an 8-measure section of something, you can learn an awful lot about your orchestration and your your approach to it just by getting those read. Throw it out to your high school students and see what sticks. You don't even have to tell them it's yours, and just get used to the idea of how chords will come together. Certainly listen and read within the field. One of the greatest things that I'm seeing coming out now is all of the score view videos for originals and for arrangements, where as you're listening to it, you can just follow along and see exactly why something sounds the way it does. And you can start to look at voicings that make a lot of sense. But I would do it with really short things first, like, again, 8-measure sections, or if you're in an athletic environment, what can you do that would fit in a 30-second timeout? Start small and just experiment with what sounds good and what doesn't. I think a lot of us in the writing world, we got our start not just in publication, but writing in general, with our student groups. A whole lot of my early grade 2 stuff was music that I wrote for my elementary and middle school students.
Do you want to talk about commissions, or do you want to talk about advice for teachers? What do you think?
Well, I mean, on the commission front, there's a couple of different avenues that people are going now. The traditional way is reach out to a composer whose music you really like and want to reward, and work through that with them, which is, it's a very personal process. But the thing that I'm seeing more and more is the consortium approach to commissions. And, I have some opinions on how to go about that, I guess. But one way or another, when you commission that work, what you are saying is that you really appreciate what that composer has brought to the field, and you want to encourage that composer to keep doing that or to do more of that. And it's flattering whenever that comes across. I mean, I have to admit, I don't accept very many commissions, but that's also because I'm a full-time teacher, and I choose to put more of my energy into my classroom and my work here at Purdue than I do into the commissioning process. That's not to say I don't take it. I just don't take as many. There are some composers where that's their entire income. And, to reward that with a commission, honestly, that feeds them and their family. And it's a good thing to reward that, especially if you have a real connection to their music for some reason. But as far as advice to give to directors who are interested in commissioning a piece from really any composer, the best things that you can tell them are that, number one, that you're giving them lead time. There are some composers right now who are scheduling 5 years out for commissions. Others will write a piece for you next week if their schedule is open for that. The other really good thing you can tell a composer is that you have the funding piece already worked out. Too many times people are talking commissions without having any idea that we're talking usually thousands of dollars, unless they're part of a consortium commission. And a composer usually is not all that interested in saying yes to a commission if they don't believe that the funding piece ever works out. So those are the two big ones. Plan ahead and at least have the funding on hand. I don't know what you do as far as commissions, but I know that it's pretty common practice to ask for a 50% deposit at the time you agree to the commission, and then you pay the rest upon delivery of the piece. So there's a lot of investment that has to happen very early on before the conversation can even really begin.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
On that process.
And so you mentioned that you had some thoughts on consortiums.
Yeah, I do. And, this isn't probably going to be the most popular thing I say here today, but consortium commissions have a real advantage when, again, there's a group of people that really want to support a composer. If a group of people got together, or a director felt strongly about commissioning composer X, but they didn't have all the funding to themselves, they go to colleagues of theirs or make it available. Hey, I am actively pursuing a commission of composer X. Here's how much money it will cost. If we get X number of people, then we'll be able to support this piece. That, I think, is a great way to do it. But I've seen more and more some composers hop online. You see this on Facebook pretty often. Hey, I'm going to write a grade 2 piece, and I'd like to put together a consortium to pay it. And I'm thinking, you're already going to write it. And this is, in some cases, coming from composers who really don't have their feet on the ground yet, but it's also coming from people who are selling literally thousands upon thousands of copies of their music a year. And I'm going, if you're already going to write it, if you've already possibly committed to this with your publisher, why do you need a consortium to inspire you to write it? Are these directors going to get any input on the piece? Maybe not if you were already going to write it. Like if it's like I'm writing a grade 2 lyrical piece and I'm putting together a consortium, the first 20 people to buy in will get their name printed inside the cover. That to me isn't necessarily what the commissioning process has been, because at the end of the day, there isn't really going to be that personal connection with the commissioning party and the composer, which ultimately, to me, has been what the real joy of the commission process is. You're getting a piece of music where there might be some personal connection to the composer or to the group that is the group that's going to premiere the piece. So I guess I am a little bit cynical on, crowdsourcing for commissions from people who really don't need to do that. People they're already beating their doors down to commission them for new works. So I guess that's just something I'm seeing happening, that it's leaving a sour taste in my mouth, but at the same time, I also am not going down that road. And some of the people that are doing this are the people who are writing full time as their sole source of income. So I can see both sides of it. I just choose not to go down that path myself.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, there are many right now. And again, it ranges anywhere from vastly successful award-winning composers down to people who are saying, look, for $50, help me put food on the table for this next week or so. And you'll get 1 year of rights to perform it before it goes to anyone else. I understand that, especially for a younger composer getting started, I'll call it a kind of a micro commission,
sure.
Where you're not out to get a ton of money off the piece. You're just trying to just pay for some basic costs for a period of time. And hopefully then those people who've put in that money will play it and tell other people, hey, this person actually wrote a pretty good piece here. Why don't you consider doing this?
Yeah, I think for young composers, that's a good model, actually.
I agree for the younger ones, the ones that are just getting started. And I will say right now freely that I have been part of one large consortium commission before. I was still teaching high school at the time. And it was the consortium that eventually paid for Johann de Meij's Kitty O'Shea suite. It was written for the American Band College program, and I was a student in the program at the time. But we were still able to buy into the consortium after we started rehearsals on the piece. It hadn't premiered yet, but we had been practicing it. And I recognized that this was a piece that I would be very happy to do with my high school band. The buy-in to the consortium was $200, but if you were to buy the piece once it was available for print, it was going to be $250. So it was a financial decision. Sure, I'll dive right in on this consortium because I'll get the piece for $50 less. And I've performed that piece a number of times. It was a great piece, and it was definitely worth buying. And I would have bought it for $250.
That's interesting that Johann did that. That's kind of like the old subscription model for concerts, for like how Mozart got paid.
Right, but in this case, Johann wasn't the one that initiated the consortium. It was the American Band College and the Western International Band Clinic. They opened that up as a means to help them continue to pay for the consortium. But Johann was not the one that opened the door. He was, the commission came to him from American Band College, and they helped support what that cost was going to be because it was a significant piece.
All right, Matt. So I asked this set of questions of all my guests, and so I'll start with the first one. And where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think the easy answer on that one is where the trophy matters more than the performance. We've all been around this in the profession here, where we see a group just perform brilliantly, just give a performance that is emotional, technically proficient, and overall outstanding. And the performance comes in second, and the students are disappointed. When the fact, well, we did all of this, but we didn't win. That's heartbreaking to see. When you can't just enjoy something for being as beautiful as it is, or for something where you played beyond your ability or beyond what you thought your ability was when you went into it. When at the end of the day, a trophy or a score is the last memory you have of it. I'm as guilty of this as anyone. when I was teaching high school, we were entered in the concert setting in pretty high stakes competitions each year, where you were going for a division rating, of course, but there was also a competitive component of the top 16 scores will advance to state finals, and then there's this finals competition. And pretty late in my time there, I was realizing that I was more stressed about preparing for that event than any other concert we gave all year. And I thought, how dumb is this? We're playing for maybe a crowd of 50 at contest, and 3 of them have tape recorders or digital audio recorders. When we play our concerts at home, we were playing for crowds of 700 or 800 people. And those concerts weren't stressful. But the one where you had a number at the end and then you had to wait a day or two before you found out if you made state was stress-inducing, like up all night kind of nightmares. And I think that defines unhealthy, is when it really steps into your quality of life and it becomes bigger than ultimately what you're doing, which is teaching young people how to make music and how to be good people through the art of music. Now, the downside is if you look across the country, you find a lot of those programs that are producing really high quality music are competing. And you can make an argument that the motivation of the contest is more inspirational to both students and directors than the aesthetics of it. And, it's a hard line to find of when does that justify how you operate.
How do you achieve a work-life balance?
The biggest thing for me is, I'm a pretty detail-oriented person. I'm pretty OCD, and that's both diagnosed and immediately apparent to anyone that works with me for any period of time. And I live my life by what's on a schedule in as many cases as I can. And the breakthrough for me sounds so dumb, but it worked. And that was actually blocking out time on my schedule where it was me time. If I was going to eat lunch at a certain time, I actually would put lunch in my schedule. And I knew that I wouldn't schedule anything on top of it, and it made me inclined not to work through it. When I started actually setting time for me in my schedule and putting it, like writing it down, if I was using a planner or putting it in Outlook, which is what I do now, that has really made it worthwhile for me. Is I will do, even when I was teaching high school, I started doing this near the end of my time there. I would schedule a walk during my lunch break or during my prep, where I would just walk the building, or I would walk the perimeter of the building if the weather was good. It forced me away from my desk. And I said, no matter what else is going on, no matter how many things are falling apart, I'm going to step away from anything related to music, anything related to teaching, and just enjoy the weather or enjoy being physically engaged. And it's amazing how cleansing that could be. Just where you'd say, no matter what, I'm taking some time from this. We had a principal at the high school where I taught. This was a principal many years before I got there, but the stories were passed down, that he would shut his office door for an hour every day following the high school lunch period, just close his door, and it was worth your life to interfere with him during this time. And he would read. The book would vary, but he would read for 1 hour a day. And he took his time to do all of his other work. He generally was at school, 6 o'clock every morning, and he would stay after at least an hour after it was over. He would come to all the events. But he said that he needed that break in the middle of his day just to refresh and to let his brain know that it can do something other than just be that administrator. So that to me is the big one, is you have to schedule that time. Nothing is so important in your job that you can't take that time. Even if it's 5 minutes out of a 1 hour period, we just say, look, I'm just going to shut down here. I'm going to watch some stupid video, catch up on news, whatever it is. There has to be something.
All right, Matt, what are the challenges facing music education and band, and how can we best meet them?
When you sent me this in advance, I'm going, man, there's a litany of challenges, but I wanted to boil it down. There's 3 that came to mind. One of them is the obvious one, the funding issue. Music remains to be one of the first things on the chopping block, yet it's one of the things that is the most requested in a school environment. You have an athletic event. Oh, we have to have a band there. We're opening a new wing to the building. Who from the music department is going to cover this one? You want it, but then the funding sometimes comes and goes. And boy, I don't have a solution for this one other than just hoping that there are state legislators that will understand that when you start cutting money from a school, you have to understand that music is one of the first things that's going to go. It's stupid and short-sighted, but that is reality. It's the reality that we all have to live and work in. And we have to do everything we can to just keep overall school funding in a position where we can't take the humanities away. At the end of the day, when you take away humanities, we lose our humanity. We lose our ability to do what it is that makes us something a scale above a computer. So that's a big one there. Another challenge that I think is not looked at to a huge degree yet is the modernization of what defines music. Of this, I'm going to talk specifically about band, but it exists across the board. How many directors are still kind of turning up their nose at electronic instruments, whether it's synthesizers, whether it's, iPad-based or laptop-based music. We can't completely lose sight of this. The traditional forms need to continue to be taught, but we can't exclude the fact that a more contemporary approach to instrumental music can really be a breath of fresh air to our students. You see it at several universities, laptop ensembles. What they're basically saying is electronic music groups. And there are people now that at the college level, they're coming into the university having had some of these experiences and are looking for an outlet to continue. And, right now the band world as a whole seems fairly reluctant to embrace that. And we're losing out on the fact that we can use that method to really reach students or to give them a lifelong love for what this is. I had a student when I was teaching high school, we had an electronic music class. And for 2 years after that class was over, he came down to the lab and he was working on his own stuff. He made a demo CD by the time he was done with high school. And he ended up going into music industry and music business. He's doing very strong in Nashville right now, but more focused on the contemporary aspects of music, contemporary instruments. Another challenge I see is that the farther we go along here, the more activities that are available to students. We have cases where parents have to schedule play dates for their kids. It's not just a matter of them just going out and hanging out with their friends and coming back when the sun goes down. I'm sounding ancient in the way I'm talking about this, but that's really the case. There's this culture of having to book up people's lives, whether they do it to themselves or they ask their children to do this. They're filling their lives with a variety of activities. And when you have so many different things to choose from, the likelihood of them focusing on music is really going down. I think the quality of performance that comes out of this is dropping in many cases because a student isn't going to have the amount of time to practice, or they don't have time to add private lessons in the mix, or they aren't going to take that third extra ensemble because they're involved in a travel soccer team or whatever the situation is. On one hand, it's not necessarily horrible because it's encouraging a pretty well-rounded youth by the end of the day, but it does affect quality of performance or numbers in programs, which in some cases can yield a reduction in funding if the numbers don't match it.
Matt, what advice would you give your younger self, perhaps if you had a chance to talk to your 18-year-old self at your high school graduation? What would you say?
I would say, just as a general bit of advice, is just enjoy the journey a little bit more. At that point I was, going into college, I was looking at it as more performance driven, like everything went toward what will make a better performance? How will this, the concert being the end of it. But in reality, it's what you do every day in the classroom that is honestly more enjoyable than just the concert itself. The concert is a one-time snapshot, but in the classroom, you get to see everything on a day-to-day basis. I've talked to a lot of coaches that feel the same way. They have way more fun in practices than they do in games, because that's where the real work happens. That's where the development happens. And I was so performance oriented early on that I forgot to, teach what it means just to be a musician, what it means to just enjoy it for what it is, to understand that we're going after a goal, but how we get there is way more important. And then I think the other thing, which I mentioned to a little bit when we talked about work-life balance, is just remembering there's life outside of the band room. I was all about being not just being a band director, but living the life of a band director, the model where that's all this person does. I think all of us when we were kids, we all thought the teachers slept at the school because they can't possibly do anything outside of school. And I kind of had that vision of a band director. I obviously did sleep at home, but the idea that you're always in the band room and you're always working with a student here or there, you can make it overwhelming. But you can also be that career band director, that career professional, and have your own life too. Because, what good is it if you spend 80 hours a week doing what you do as a band director, and then by the time you've done it for 5 years, you're completely burnt out? You don't have at that point, you can't help anyone anymore. You lose your ability to share your gift with others because you spent too much of it too soon.
What would be the last work that you'd conduct or hear?
It's so difficult because there's so much music that I love, and it's mood based. Depending on how I'm feeling in one particular day, it could be really, it could vary even within a specific day on what that answer is. I don't have a bucket list piece from a conductor's perspective. There's some that I've done multiple times. There's some that I've enjoyed working on more than others, but there's not one that I can really say is I'll feel unfulfilled if I don't do this before I die. So I guess I really don't have an answer on that one. And as far as something that I'd like to hear, this goes back to the very first couple of questions that we talked about, where I talked about where my music career or my music interest started. And that's just sitting on the piano bench listening to my grandmother play. I know that someone in my family has some tapes of this, but there are a couple songs that she played that the whole family sang along with, and I don't even remember the words anymore. I was too little to really know. But that was kind of what family time was, of grandma sitting around the piano playing. I'd like to hear her play again at some point before I go. And I know, again, I to my understanding, there's some people kind of in our family that have some cassette tapes where they just kind of recorded her playing, and I don't even think she knew she was being recorded. So we can talk about what that means legally later. But the idea that someone somewhere has the ability to let us all hear grandma play again, I might need to go down that road to hear that one more time, because those were special memories to me.
I don't think anyone's going to bother with the copyright issues there.
I think the songs are probably PD by now anyway, so
they might be. All right. Is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
There's nothing really in particular. I'm working on a fair number of things, both on the marching band side. I have the imminent deadline of a recording session in 30 days coming up for marching band work. So I'm getting some things off the desk right now. And probably the most exciting thing from that is, Hal Leonard just acquired the rights to a whole bunch of music. I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but we picked up the ability to do some music with the Civilization video game series. So I'm working on a couple of Christopher Tin's pieces for marching band, and possibly one for concert band as well. So those are things I just worked on one of the marching band charts for a long time yesterday and got a first draft done. And I'll be working on the other one probably later this afternoon. But that's exciting because, that's a video game series that's one of my favorites. I've played since the very first one. So the theme from Civilization 4 and Civilization 6 are the main two I'm working on. Yeah,
that's such terrific music in that. There's another podcast called The Portfolio Composer by Garrett Hope, and Garrett had Christopher Tin on for one episode.
Yeah, he's written some incredible music, and he has a really fascinating career too. He got his start, as I understand it, transcribing. He was asked to take down some of the music from some of the greats, like the early John Williams soundtracks where the scores don't even exist anymore, of transcribing them out so groups can continue to play that music.
Yeah, it's such a good exercise. The stories, we all know the legendary stories of people who transcribe works as young composers.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Including a few in our field right now who are successul.
It's the best way to do it when you not only you learn how they made their music tick, but it really opens up your ear.
Oh, it sure does. Sure does. All right, Matt, how can people get in touch with you?
Facebook is probably the best way to do it. I generally will I'll accept the friend requests from anyone who looks like they're actually in the profession. Now that I'm teaching at the college level, I don't have to be super paranoid about, don't be friends with your students on Facebook or any of that. I'm dealing with adults now, so that kind of helps there. And, just seek me out through both publishers I work with. Both of them have contact the composer capability, both CL Barnhouse and Hal Leonard. That's probably the easiest way to reach out with any questions.
Excellent. Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Sure thing, Mark. Thanks so much. I'm looking at the clock on here and not realizing we've been talking for a long time. It really flew by.